Thank you. So welcome to tonight's Active Travel Cafe. Tonight we will open with our usual news roundup, and if you've got anything to share, start mulling that. And then we're going to be joined by Jonathan Bray, who for 20 years was the director of the Urban Transport Group, which is the group that pulls together the network of city region transport authorities. So delighted to kind of hear his reflections on where things are at, having stood down from that body earlier in the year. And then we'll also hear from Ranty Highwayman with his regular slot on the good, the bad and the interesting of infrastructure as spotted by him. So I think we'll get going. Okay, so does anyone have any news they'd like to share, or updates they've seen, or comments? And straight over to Paul in Cardiff.
Borrowed our pound from Wales. So some of you have seen, I'm sure, that here in Wales, the new 20 mile an hour urban default speed limit came into force on Sunday. So every road that used to be a 20 mile an hour in a village or town or city is now 30 miles an hour, unless the local authority have put in place an exemption. There's been a tremendous amount of noise about this change, both in the regular media and on social media, and particularly on social media. That noise continues into this week, pretty much unabated. The good news is, from where I am in Cardiff, it looks to have made a difference. I actually live in one of the trial areas, so in theory people should have been sticking to no more than 20 miles an hour for about the last 6 months where I live. I think adherence to that was at best described as patchy, but the last few days when I've been out and about, the overall average traffic speed is definitely down. And I think the kind of most, is it the modal average, the most common speed that people are doing is definitely down as well. Not everybody, of course, is sticking to it, just as not everybody stuck to the old 30 mile an hour limit, but the streets definitely look a more inviting place to cycle and to walk. So it'd be interesting to see what adherence is like in the longer term, and if it remains good, what the effect is on cycling and walking maybe into the spring and summer of next year.
Thanks for that summary, Paul. And yeah, it's been really good to see that. Well, before we move on to other people who've got their hands up, does anyone want to come in on the 20 miles an hour stuff? Has anyone seen anything interesting or have a comment on that? Yeah, I thought you might, Scott. So yeah, Scott Arthur, who's a lead councillor in Edinburgh, who joined us a few months ago, tell us what was going on there. Scott, do come in.
So Edinburgh's had a 20 scheme for some time. It's not complete. So there is some roads which are still 30, mainly, not all, but some of the key routes through the city. And there's one or two that remain 40. But because we went for, quite a wide scale approach, it has changed driver behaviours broadly. Now, it's only reduced the average speed, because Edinburgh's a congested city anyway. It's only reduced average speed by less than 2 miles per hour. I think the average speed is now something like 22 or 24, something like that, in the 20 areas. And this is often used to attack the scheme, saying that it's made such a small difference. But what is really done behind the scenes is the very fastest drivers, it's brought their speed down quite considerably. And that's what lies behind the accident reduction. So if you do a Google, there's been some independent research done which compares before and after the scheme in Edinburgh. And if memory serves me right, so don't quote me on this, my memory's not great, I think we've seen something like a 40% reduction in accidents and a similar reduction in deaths. Obviously the deaths, it's small numbers, of course, in a city like Edinburgh, but the accident reduction's very clear indeed, actually. And I've been a councillor now for 6.5 years, and there's always grumbles about the scheme, and those grumbles are resurfacing again just now because of what's happened in Wales. But in that 6.5 years of being a councillor, nobody has contacted me to say they want their road to go back to 30. And I think that's an important thing, because whilst they're driving the other way or elsewhere, they might want some roads to go back to 30, not their road. And this is this was used in the council when councillors really got on their high horse, if you like, to complain about the 20 scheme. That was often my retort. Well, which roads do you want to go back to 30? And then often they go quiet. But nonetheless, I mean, the most recent round of consultation we've had on extending the scheme does show that, despite everything I've said, that views remain very mixed in Edinburgh. And so we are going to have to be cautious about how we take that forward. We'll be publishing that consultation quite soon, and then we'll be acting on it early next year, hopefully expanding the scheme. Sorry to hog this, one last thing is, as well as urban roads, we do have quite a lot of roads outside the urban area that connect to little towns and villages outside the city itself. And what that consultation will also report on, and I think there's broad support for this, is bringing those speeds down on those roads from 60 probably down to 40 in most cases. So steps in the right direction, and hopefully others can learn from us. And I think hopefully the other UK nations will follow Wales's leadership, actually, because I think what's happened there is absolutely fantastic. Sorry for the wrong ramble, but hopefully you get the point.
Absolutely not, Scott. That was really great, and great to follow up from your previous appearance. Any more on 20 miles an hour? Robin and Graham. I'll go Graham first. Graham.
It interests me very much what Councillor Scott was just talking about. I did a lot of work on the implementation of the VONERF in the 80s. When I say a lot of work, I did some work. And one of the things...
Sorry, Graham, implementation of what?
The VONERF, the Dutch forerunner of the low traffic neighbourhood. The idea of changing local streets in the face of car traffic and car parking. And strange that you weren't familiar with that.
I am asking for the benefit of other people.
Thank you very much. Well, there were two things that come to mind. One was that a sociologist was telling me in '82 that the city council, which had been working on the VONERF program for some time, approached a what you might call a working class area, Lombok in Utrecht, and only one street wanted to be a VONERF, and it was done. And I was told that within 18 months, the other streets wanted similar kind of work to reduce the speed and convenience of traffic. So it's very much a learning thing. And there was a big research project done in Utrecht on satisfaction of these, shall I say, low traffic neighborhoods. And the outcome, if I remember, I can't remember precise figures, was overwhelmingly that people, if they chose to move house, overwhelmingly wanted to move to an area that was similarly treated, but often different from the one that they lived in. So it's interesting the way that design matters so much. Of course, the Dutch VONERF bear little resemblance to the English low traffic neighbourhood. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Robin.
Thanks. Yes, so obviously I've been following the Welsh thing. There were a couple of very good debates, one on BBC Any Questions, which is the radio version of Question Time, and one on Politics Live, which is a TV one over the weekend, which I thought were quite measured and reasonably intelligent, and essentially boiled down to one or two people saying, I still want to drive at speed and it doesn't really matter, and several more sensible people saying, well, we don't actually want to kill people, do we? So I think the slower speed came out very well. In Abingdon, which is the market town where I live, we're just kind of midway through implementation. So some of the signs are up, and but it's not quite complete and therefore legal yet. There is definitely a slowing down of speed, just like Scott talked to us about. So I think we're seeing the same effects. And I'll see if I can find it, but there was definitely a study, I think I remember it being different places in Scotland, and it's essentially a chart of the speed impact relative to the speeds that were on the road before. And essentially the faster the speed was before, the more the speed comes down when you put the 20 mile an hour speed limit in, which really supports. It's similar to the point about the faster drivers slow down. It's not quite the same because it's the road, not the drivers, but it really seems to have more impact in that case. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. So I don't think we've got any more 20 mile an hour points. And I just had a question on it for the chat, really. If anyone's got an answer to this one, which is, I just wonder if one of the things about 20 miles an hour is the demand that it suppresses that kind of doesn't show up, obviously, in kind of accident stats. I just wonder if there's any evidence or if it's worthy of studying that the sort of the perception of safety that it provides when those speeds come down, because obviously accidents is only one measure of that. So if anyone knows of any evidence around that, do post it in the chat. Okay, we'll move on for 20 miles an hour and over to Rachel.
Yeah, so 2 big wins this week. The first one was our first county active travel forum. So just a bit of context. I'm in the county, very different beast from the city, polar opposite places. So that was a massive win. And the second one, and we had a lot of attendance and a lot of support there. So, and a lot of contrition actually from the county council. They got a 0 rating from Active Travel England, and a lot of, yeah, oops, we made a mistake. So we've kind of got to a good place with that, and we're really getting going with them. And the second thing is 2 of their trial school streets in the northern part of the county are going to become permanent because they've had overwhelmingly positive feedback. And they've also started to link their messaging to reducing school run traffic, which is the best way to do it here because people hate that. And I think it's just the easiest win. So in terms of moving forward, I always think this is probably a good litmus test, this county, because it is ultra conservative, you know, small c and big C. And if you can do it here, you can do it anywhere. So, you know, I think it's been massive actually this last week in terms of moving forward. And that's it for me.
Love it. We love a success. So do feel free to share them, large or small. Ruth.
Well done, Rachel. Well, that's quite ironic because last week I spoke about a success of Cycleway 9 being passed by Cabinet unanimously, and not surprisingly, the Tory group, 8 Tory councillors in Chiswick, have called it in. So the call-in is on Thursday. Not sure if everyone's familiar what a call-in means, but it means that councillors can get together and object to something that's been decided by Cabinet and make it go to the scrutiny committee. So the scrutiny committee will have a look at whether they went through due process. We think that it will pass, but if it doesn't, it will be another month of shenanigans, which means delaying the very good new things that needed to have gone in anyway. So it just means it's pushing it further down the line. But the funny thing is, which I must tell you, is one of the councillors who objected to it, there's photos of him all over the internet of him cycling through red lights on the wrong side and generally ignoring zebra crossings and things. So it is quite funny, really. But it is a bit annoying that the Tories have decided to gather together and call it in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. One step forward, one step back. A merry dance. Jamie.
Thank you. I'm from Brighton and Hove. Last time I came on here was to sadly say that how our funded active travel lanes have been attacked. This is going on further now, and the war on the cyclist is continuing. And we have a busy pedestrianised street, Gardner Street, which is the centrepiece of the North Lane. And the council are now going to de-pedestrianise it, and at the same time ban cycling there, which is very sad. This is Brighton and Hove Labour Party. One of their councillors put out a tweet last weekend saying, "Why don't you all just understand we don't like cycling?" And then she said, and accused us all of being disableist and ageist. So classic stuff here. We're fighting on, but we have very little recourse to stop what they're doing. We had really great interventions from people from this forum last time, which I really appreciate. So if anyone can do or say anything, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Over and out.
Wow. Yeah, so bit of moral support for Jamie, or indeed tips or suggestions. We'll be here till just after 6, so you can do that in the chat, or if we've got time at the end. Tim, we'll make this our last point actually, and then we'll move to our speaker.
Quick ones then. We've now on the Safe Streets Now protests on Saturday the 30th. There are now events happening in Norwich, Leicester, Havering, Nottingham, Bedford, Cardiff, Oxford, Bristol, London, Bounds Green, and Birmingham. And then on the 1st of October, Leicester's having its first Kidical Mass organised by a group of mums. So we're doing both. We're doing the demonstration and then a Kidical Mass the next day. We know we're late with Kidical Mass. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. I think any date goes as far as those things are concerned. So right, do feel free to keep sharing bits and pieces in the chat. I'm going to move on actually, Graham, to the speaker section now. So do feel free to post in the chat. And just lost sight of Jonathan, but I'm going to ask Jonathan to join us now. Jonathan's going to speak for a little while. As I said at the beginning, he was the director of the Urban Transport Group, which is quite an influential group bringing together the city region transport authorities. And as he stepped down from that, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to hear what he really thinks. So going to hand the floor to him now, and then we'll have discussion afterwards. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks, and thanks so much for inviting me to tonight's cafe. So I thought what I would do, was the idea is I give about 10 minutes for a discussion, was to try and chuck a few thoughts out there to inform a discussion and maybe provoke some responses along the lines of where do we find ourselves, how do we move forward. So how I've tried to structure it is to give 3 points on the glass half full, 3 points on the glass half empty, and 3 points on how we might move forward. Just a little bit more background about me. I've spent a lifetime on campaigning and policy under the broad heading of making progressive change happen on transport. And over those years, there's probably three big campaigns that I've had a leading role in. The first was the successful campaign in the 90s to smash the dominance and the extent of the roads programme, first in London and then nationally through playing a leading role in the network of anti-road building campaigns that there were in London and then more widely. I coordinated the Save Our Railways campaign against rail privatisation, which came close but no cigar. So sorry about that, everybody, but pretty dry in the end. And thirdly, ridiculously long efforts to get buses back under public control, which finally is going to bear fruit in Manchester on Sunday, when the first regulated bus services roll out of the garages since the disaster of bus deregulation in the mid-1980s. But the work I did around buses was as Director of Urban Transport Group, which is a network for the major transport authorities around the country, Transport for Greater Manchester, Transport for London, Transport for West Midlands, and so on. So I guess perhaps what I bring to this discussion is I've had the campaigner experience, and at heart I think I'm still a campaigner, but I've also been on the inside in terms of getting a good idea about how local government and city region government thinks. So 3 things on the glass half full. Active travel has gone mainstream. If you look back a decade, I can tell you that no one ever talked about active travel in terms of our board on the Urban Transport Group. There's a slight excuse about the highways authorities, but nevertheless, it was a non-issue active travel is about that, the guy at the end of the corridor sitting next to the guy who does buses at the end of the corridor, not particularly important, a kind of fringe, weirdy-beardy kind of thing. And that has completely changed, as we can see around us, despite all the problems that we have. Active travel is now taking its place alongside public transport in terms of the priorities of local authorities, local transport authorities, certainly our members of the urban transport group, as was. I think the second one I've already kind of trailed there, which is the enormous step forward that bus franchising starting Greater Manchester is. I think the wider significance of it, and you can see it through the B network, is that it's not just about providing an integrated bus service, but it'll do that. It's about moving towards something that looks and feels pretty much like what you see when you get off a mainline station in London. One brand, one network, one authority which is responsible for the lot, and also pulling in the bike hire schemes. And ultimately, you can build out from that base, perhaps in a way that even London has struggled to a bit, into the fabled mobility as a service, building out from the core of public transport and what you have already. So it's really an enormous step forward, I think, and it will roll out across the whole of Greater Manchester over the next few years, and we'll see it, I think, as well in the Liverpool City region and across Wales as well before too long. And talking of Wales, that's my third glass half full example, and it links, I think, as well to we have seen, if you look at the last 2 decades, it's been a very halting process, but we're in a better place than we were in terms of powers that have been devolved subnationally, and particularly that's showing at the moment in Wales. Small countries can do big things, and under that leadership, because of the smaller bureaucracy to deal with, you can quickly move from something that's quite cosy and change averse, arguably a bit like Scotland is at the moment. He's on things like buses, but you can quickly change that around, and Wales is certainly demonstrating that under Lee Waters' leadership. So as people are talking about, we've got 20-mile-an-hour zones. We also have seen a roads programme halted. We're also going to see all the buses in Wales brought back under public control, made integrated again, and I'm delighted that Lee Waters has got me on board to advise and support on that process, and I am loving it. We're also seeing significant investment in what had been neglected rail network with the transformation of the railway lines that go down the valleys into Cardiff at long last. And I think Lee Waters really needs our support and our praise and our backing. Can be lonely in that kind of position when you're leading from the front, but I think when other people in other parts of the UK and the wider world say, hey, look, Wales is really doing something quite special here, that prestige is worth having. And I personally think Lee should do more speaking in the wider UK. He should be at the Labour Party conference, but I'm sure he's got a lot on his plate in Wales, but we need to get behind him as much as we can. So that was my positive side. On my glass half empty, 3 things there. The state of national politics around transport. I think we've got, I can say these kind of things now, but I'm out of local government, but I think we've got a second-rate John Major Tribute Act versus a second-rate Tony Blair Tributes Act at the centre of politics. And although I am not a fan of Boris Johnson for wider reasons, I think it gave some quite remarkable direction on urban domestic transport policy, which is now running into the sands. And with his advisor, what they were really trying to do is make other cities like London, but at 3 times the pace, with a third of the money, and without the necessarily devolutionary tools. So, and I think our experience at Urban Transport Group was everybody hated Gilligan for pushing things so hard and being so dictatorial. But I think he was, in some ways, it was the right thing to do in that period, because he managed to push and cajole and move things forward while he had that influence, because these things don't last very long. And it's not the best way to run the country. We should be looking to more devolution rather than people in London getting ideas and prosecuting whether those ideas are either good or bad. But nevertheless, there was some real direction there, which we can see is dissipating quite rapidly. I think the Tories seem concerned to not annoy their voter base and the public more widely, and Labour seem concerned to demonstrate that anything that looks anything like Corbynism was wrong. And having experienced the Labour Party, New Labour last time around, I don't think we did very much on transport. I think they squandered that opportunity. Going back to bus regulation, it was the Tories that gave us workable bus regulation powers, not Labour. And there are countless other examples, as to Darling, knocking trams back by at least a decade, and so on and so forth. When I was at Urban Transport Group, my experience of National Labour in terms of policy development was by far the weakest of any political party that I'd experienced. Usually a party in opposition does some reaching out, round tables, talking to people about what their policy might be. It may be when they actually get there, they don't do much of it, but nevertheless, there's that kind of engagement process. Hardly any meaningful engagement this time around. Very, very top down. I really hope I'm wrong. If the polls are right, Labour get in. I really hope I'm wrong, but it's very hard for me to feel optimistic, having had the experience of the previous regime of the kind of Labour right, which this called Starmer and co are very keen on. Continuing on the gloomy themes, what we've seen again, and we've seen it periodically, so at the fuel protests quite a few years ago, but car is the big political hot button. It doesn't seem to have changed at all. When I was at Urban Transport Group, the better public transport was not politically contentious in any way between political parties. Active travel wasn't particularly, regulation of public transport wasn't particularly, but it's always the car culture. It's always there as this hot button that comes to bite us periodically, as it is doing right now. And also the car continues to dominate trip patterns. If you know, the car is still king if you look at trip patterns, and in much of the geography of the UK, the car isn't just king; it's emperor or empress in terms of its dominance. Even doubling public transport wouldn't make that much difference if you go from a very low percent to double a very low percent. It's not that much difference. So we still have this ongoing issue. I suppose the only thing you could say is that the right and the beyond the right tend to alight on issues for a while. At the moment, they're alighted on the car issue, but there may be something else that attracts their attention as part of this churn of culture war battles that the right is undertaking. The third, glass half empty. I think the lure of spending money on zombie road schemes is still there. I get fed up of seeing local authority documents where it's all about, on the front cover, it's pictures of children playing, and it's all about what we can do for the planet, what have you. But it's always good to look at the annex and see what the money is actually being spent on. And we've still got too many zombie road schemes that we can't seem to kill off, that highways engineers want to build before they retire. They want that Brunel moment. And a lot of this is undercover, I think. They don't really get involved in our kind of debates, but they just get on with it down in the background. About 5 years ago, I went to a meeting in a big hotel in Scotland, somewhere out in the Highlands, where all these highways engineers are meeting. I don't know why they invited me, but I was there. But it was pretty clear they were all probably older than me, and all male, and all still pursuing those road schemes they wanted to get built. So that's still going on in the background, and there's really no excuse for it. Even if an individual road you justify it on the basis of whatever local improvements you say it might bring, just put the cost of these things and the limited geographical impacts that they have compared with what else we could do with that money, clearly active travel in particular, it's just not justified, and it needs to stop. So that zombie road program marching on in the background is another of my glass half empty. So 3 ways forward. See what you think of this one. But I think we could do with more solidarity between active travel and public transport campaigners. Certainly, I feel like the bus regulation campaign has been quite a lonely one to get to where we are, and you didn't always feel that. Although we tried to support the active travel cause, that necessarily it was always coming across the other way. And a kind of sub issue around that is, and it is a challenge, I know, but to what extent people get behind or criticise the cycling measures that local authorities do introduce. And bad schemes shouldn't happen and shouldn't be allowed to happen. But sometimes, I'll give you an example. For example, when West Yorkshire pursued the superhighway, which was kind of symbolic, it showed that cycling had been taken seriously. There's a lot of criticism of the details, and some of that was justified. But the big picture was you had people in that authority who'd stuck the neck out internally. It wasn't always that popular with politicians locally, and they felt like they were getting hammered by both sides, and no one was really supporting them. So I think it's about that, having that awareness about providing that support, even if some of the details aren't quite right. But it's a tricky one, and you can shoot me down in flames on that one. I think the second way forward is we need to talk more about suburbs. I think when we talk about transport, we tend to be actually thinking about city centres, and there's a mountain of reports about what we do about transport in cities and urban centres, but very little about suburbs. But most people live in suburbs, and it's not easy to sort out transport in city centres, but it's a damn sight harder in the suburbs. And I fear that we're in danger, as in many of these culture things, of having a part of the landscape of the UK, which is SUV, where a lot of people live, and then there'll be these little nice places, which is all about bicycles and public transport. And this will play into this wider culture war. I mean, I think there are things that could be done about suburbs. I think e-bikes have got tremendous potential around orbital journeys and the kind of journeys that people want to make, where public transport makes it harder to serve. I think road mobility hubs are very interested in what's happening in some German cities, where they seem to be taking a systematic approach to trying to provide everyone within a certain distance of mobility hubs, where you can hire e-bikes, e-scooters, car hire, ties in with public transport. Maybe people on this call know more about it than I do, but I'm very interested in what people think. My other theory is I think people are they're going to have private mobility hubs, their own home for those who've got the money in the suburbs. They'll have their e-scooter, they'll have their e-bike, they'll have their car, and this kind of private mobility hub may also help reduce the need for or the desire to have a second or a third car. So I think what we do about the suburbs is where the action is for me in terms of policy thinking. And I think that's also linked to some of the language we use. Going to be interesting to see what people think. But to me, what we need to do as a sector is get much better at selling these policies. It's not always the case of the policies are right. It's that we're not necessarily selling it as well as we might do. And I think it's a skill that we need to give more value to inside transport authorities. Transport authorities, local authorities can be kind of quasi-military in a way. It's about the hard stuff, about the engineering and all the rest of it. But it's not that's stopping us in many cases. It's the fact that we haven't managed to persuade, or we haven't sold it effectively. And also the language we use. I mean, I'm not doing any kind of pile on low traffic neighbourhoods, all power to people who are pursuing them. But is low traffic in itself a goal that people relate to? Isn't it more about a better neighbourhood? Are we sometimes guilty of using these kind of technical terms that and not really speaking to what people want. So how do we address all that kind of the language we use and the selling of this? For example, I was very interested in something I read about Helsinki, where they've called boulevardization, which is where they're talking about trying to turn the main roads into something which is also about more civilized, about different modes, about the shops and the houses that are on those boulevards. And I thought, yeah, that's a really interesting phrase. I'm not sure, it might be a bit too continental for us in the UK. I don't know, but I think it's worth thinking about these different ways of talking about this. And also it ties into really what the future of our streets is. There's some very tricky issues around that, because we've got far more legitimate calls on the streets that we can accommodate in the available space. If you think about everything we're trying to fit onto those streets, from bus lanes to active travel to anti-terror measures to street beautification, so the fact that occasionally you're going to have funeral corteges and removal vans, electric vehicles, climate resilience, I could go on and on and on. And it's a tricky task to try and ensure that we make the best trade-offs to get the best outcomes, and how we sell that. So I will stop there, probably no more than 10 minutes, but really interested to hear what people think about the glass half empty and glass half full, what rubbish I've been spouting or not, and to have a bit of a discussion about where we go next.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And yeah, I'm sure people would like to come in on some of those points. Masses for us to go at there. So just while people are composing their thoughts, and as I said, do feel free to post something in the chat if you don't want to come in with your own voice. I'll just pick up the first point, which is your very first point was about active travel going mainstream. And I just thought I'd ask kind of what you thought the reason for that was. Was there a turning point, or was it a gradual turning of a tanker?
Well, that is a good question. I think London had a big effect on the other city regions. I think also it was kind of, well, it's hard to argue against it on the why it wasn't being pursued. So I'm sure there are reasons too, but I think London providing that lead and that leadership had a big effect.
Well, let's take that as an answer for now. And yeah, if you have any more thoughts. Right, we've got a few hands up, so let's ask Rachel first.
No, that was really interesting, and you were making me think about the whole positioning of the sort of LTNs and all the rest of it. And what I'm finding here, and I think I'm in quite a unique position because I'm right on the edge of a city, so I see all the good stuff going on there, and I'm in the county, so I can see that there's a real difference between the two things and how we need to approach it differently. And in that sort of city setting, it is very much about the commuting routes and so on. And even in the county, in the urban area around the city, it's all about the commuting routes, and that works. But it doesn't work in the county because people aren't going to be commuting those distances. I mean, I'm right on the edge, and I'll only do it into the city occasionally because I'm right on the edge, and it's, you know, it takes too much time. So when you're talking about positioning, when it comes to a county setting, it's much more about school run traffic and stopping that. And that is working. That resonates because the councillors get so much hassle from residents about the parking all over the place, the schools, that nightmare traffic. And I can really see the distinction in this setting between how we should position things in the city and the urban areas that are in the county that border the city, and how we should position things in the county. And it's all about those safe routes to school and stopping that nonsense school run traffic. And that resonates. So I think the message and the sell is that's how you do it in this sort of place. Just your thoughts on that, really.
Well, my thoughts. No, it sounds yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. It's a good point. I guess part of me made me think of when we're investing or in cycling, what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to get new people cycling? Are we trying to make it better for those already cycling? All those kind of questions. Yeah, I do think there is a case for, at least to start with, targeting where there's the most kind of potential latent demand, and where people can see that the infrastructure is being used.
You can't underestimate the cultural issue. It's
Yeah.
just, I've realised it's too late for a lot of adults. It's too late. Don't bother. If it's commuting, I think it's different. But I look around here and I think it's a nigh on impossible task. You have to start with the kids. You have to engage the schools, the parents, the families, and then it happens over a couple of generations. But there's just no way you're going to get loads of people, changing their behaviour
Do
here.
you think e-bikes might get a different demographic? And
it tends to be leisure, or people that do want to, this sort of the niche people that do, and we do get nurses from here that cycle off into the hospital and they've got e-bikes, but you're not talking volumes of people. It's kind of very incremental. It's too slow. So I just feel that it's all about, in places like this, the cultural barriers are just too great. They're too great. It's not a city. It's a county setting where that entrenched car dependency mentality is just too difficult to shift. And you have to therefore do it with the kids.
I also wonder if this is actually where, Jonathan, your point about public transport and active travel actually, working together and with like the B network in Greater Manchester, it all being integrated. I think in rural areas that's kind of essential, and better public transport, then you can walk to the bus, but the bus has to exist to start with. So I don't know if you might want to think about that point. But I'm conscious I should bring in other questions.
Please,
so
yeah.
Adam.
Yeah, just on an interesting thing that's happening locally is we have a new supplier of the sort of e-scooters, but they brought e-bikes in as well, and they've been controlled up until now. Ward councillors could oppose e-scooters coming in, but the moment e-bikes came into the mix, some of these areas are now saying, why haven't we got them? Whereas prior to that, they weren't that worried. So I think this idea of e-bikes as a concept is really powerful. But my question primarily is we're seeing the city region sustainable transport settlements are pretty much the driving factor now in certain regions. But and in particular, there's a focus in Weka, west of England, where it's providing bus infrastructure, and where previously there's been cycle infrastructure, people said, oh, you need to sort the buses out. Now that they're deciding to put down bus lanes and all this type of stuff, people are saying, well, that's going to make my driving terrible. You shouldn't do this. Yeah. And so I think you're right in some ways that we shouldn't be campaigning just for cycling and walking and cycling infrastructure, but we do need to recognize we're also pushing the public the public transport message. But how does that work at a bigger scale? Because clearly you're going to see these combined authorities. We've got 600 million pounds being invested in the next 5 years. We've got potentially 900 million in 27 to 32. And so are you going to see this sort of transit deserts, or how do you fix that?
Did you want me to come back?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
you're the person I'm asking.
No, sure. Yeah, just aware that I didn't want to speak all the time if other people also want to come in. But I think a few thoughts. Yeah, I'm a big fan of e-bikes. If you see the take up, you can see it for yourself if you go to places like Germany. I just think it opens it up to a whole different demographic, notwithstanding what people are saying about Oxfordshire and places that may be particularly hard to penetrate, but I'm sure we can do a lot more with e-bikes. And I think e-scooters have tended to hog the headlines because partly because they're linked to all this disruptive new mobility stuff. It's all very trendy, and the big Californian companies want to their latest ruse to take over the transport world. But actually, I think e-bikes have got more potential to do useful things. I think e-scooters have a role, but e-bikes have got a bigger role. And I think we should be doing more. And if Germany and some of the other countries are anything to go by, I think we can get results. I think in terms of the city region sustainable transport strategies, there is quite a lot. I know we always moan and we say the urban transport group, we haven't got any money, etc. And so that's short revenue. But actually some areas have now got really to ramp up their delivery capabilities. given the scale of the infrastructure investment. And going back to the future streets thing I was talking about, the trouble is kind of fine-grained work on streets does require quite a lot of resource and skills and capacities and capabilities to deliver effectively, not to trigger enormous backlash. And I think perhaps the different interest groups can help this, because one choice is we all scrap against each other, buses slag off active travel, active taxis slag off everyone else, road haulage associations, what about deliveries, and everyone just fights for their bit of this road space, and everyone's going to be unhappy ultimately. There's going to have to be some trade-offs. There's just no choice, and it's how we manage that, and how the different interest groups kind of hold fire a bit and show some empathy and sympathy, particularly between the bus side, which can have a go at active travel, just as active travel can sometimes have a go at the bus side in particular. And one of the things we were tried to do at Urban Transport Group, where we did have an active travel group and a bus group, was to stop that from happening and to try and bring them together a bit.
Before I bring in Bob, Jonathan, on that point, what if any integrated network planning can happen in the current world? So if we're going to do what you've said, we kind of need those networks to be planned.
Well, again, I mean, I would say, and I can say this now I'm out of it, that I think in the other big city regions, the strategic highways network should go up to the city region level to replicate the situation in London, because I think that's made a big difference in terms of getting some better outcomes on streets in particular, and also around active travel. I think local streets are a kind of local community issue really, and they should stay with districts. But you take somewhere like Greater Manchester with 10 separate highway districts, and also actually 10 separate taxi licensing bodies. I don't think it makes sense. I think it should go up, and then, as in London, we can start to plan in a more integrated way, particularly in support of active travel, and replicate more easily and effectively some of the stuff we've seen in London. I know there's more cooperation and collaboration going on, but I think you do get into this kind of slight turf war issue, and politicians are reluctant to go into that territory, but it's the grown-up and rational thing to do.
Yeah, interesting. Bob, thank you for holding on.
Not at all. I actually would disagree with Jonathan about the nomenclature issue. I mean, it is, in one case, people have said, low traffic neighborhoods are really filtered permeability, which has been going on for a couple of decades, and there are forms of low traffic neighborhood going on way before that, and that it's basically a traffic management issue. And when you take something to committee, you just say this is a traffic management scheme. However, I don't think that's going to stop the antis. And actually, if you're talking about the things that make it attractive, low traffic neighborhood, does actually appeal to a lot of people who want less cars around. I mean, you could say it's low motor traffic neighborhood to go on one of my hobby horses, because you're not stopping cycling or walking traffic. And you're actually talking about low through motor traffic, to be sort of more precise. But so I would say that actually changing the name isn't going to do much good. And look at what John Burke, who was councillor in Hackney, who put in a lot of LTNs, he's saying, look, don't fiddle around with the name. It doesn't really make any difference. That's just my view.
Yeah, no, I can see where you're coming from. So absolutely a fair point. Still, my gut feeling is we can get better, whether it might not be changing the name of low traffic neighbourhoods, but my gut feeling is we can do better, and we more resources could be or need to be devoted. And I know a place like Oxford have been thinking quite hard about how they do that, and obviously they've still run into a lot of a lot of challenges, a lot of problems. But I think there is something about how we're communicating that we could do better and need to do better.
Right. Well, I think that there was a couple of points made in the chat. I'll just sort of throw into the mix, and then we might leave that there and then just finish up with Mark. But one was from Wookie in Cambridge, talking about sort of politics and that this isn't necessarily a straightforward party divide, as you identified as well, Jonathan. It's not kind of Labour for and Conservatives against. It's more nuanced than that. And Wookie saying, feels like the sort of old Labour tends to be very pro-bus, but not really interested in cycling. And I wondered if you detected that, Jonathan.
Yeah, I guess there's also a generational thing. But that, when I first came into the urban transport group and was dealing with some of the councillors, it was certainly another world, really, that you didn't really see too much in other parts of life. Very traditional, older kind of machine politics. But everyone would say it themselves, there has been a generational change in councils and local government. So that situation has changed quite a bit. But I think it's a good point that you make, and I think it's a fair point. It's changing gradually with that generational change, I think, within the elected representatives.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll pause the discussion there. And Ruth, did you want to have so Ruth's got a hand up. Did you want to make a point there, Ruth? Sorry, you're on mute at the moment.
Okay. Sorry, I'm ironing, which is why I keep disappearing. Thanks, Jonathan. Fascinating. Generationally, though, I mean, I'm 70 and I cycle with an awful lot of people who are 70 and even 80, 81, 82, 83. The generational thing for me actually is the 40-somethings who are absolutely, committed to being in the car and doing the school run by car and doing all their shopping by car and putting the kids in the back of the car. And then sometimes you'll see those children on bikes, but the parents are in the car having taken them to cycle because those parents don't cycle. So I think, unfortunately, we've got this, a huge gap in the middle, is my feeling and my observations where I am. So old people like me do cycle and older. And sadly, I think we've missed it, Rachel. I think we've got a gap in the middle. But Hounslow, I have to shout out Hounslow yet again. They do the most brilliant one-to-one cycle training, and they encourage the parents to come along as well. So it's not just the children. And they've got, they've got 250 Muslim women who are cycling as cycle sisters, and they do all this one-to-one training, and it's fantastic. Fantastic. Makes a difference.
Yeah, I'd heard, I saw a presentation by someone from Hounslow a while back, and it was really good. So, but I'll have a look on the internet and see what else they're up to, because it does sound good. I think the other thing also is, what does success look like? Because going back to the statistics, the car dominates trip levels, and particularly in some areas, it's just off the scale dominance. So the car isn't going to disappear. And I think we're going to have to face that. I think getting car occupancy levels that they're pretty low in the UK compared to some of the European countries has to be part of the mix, because even a small change in car occupancy, because so many people are driving, has quite a dramatic impact on emissions. So, I don't think we can set our sights on winning over every motorist. It ain't going to happen. We are going to have to electrify the car fleet, but it's kind of, where are the areas and to what extent, and how can we maximise that change in these different kind of contexts, and for these, be it low density suburbs or more built up suburbs, and also around these particular demographics. And again, I really do think e-bikes can play a big role there.
Right, thank you, Jonathan. We will move on to our final section, which is Mark Philpott's on the good, the bad, and the interesting. On that discussion about sort of age and demographics, I've just posted a link in the chat. I think it's not so much, you can't divide hard lines by age, but there's a piece of work that was done there looking at kind of how you might segment the audience based on kind of attitudes to journeys, which was quite interesting. I'm sure they're not the only ones either, but useful way of thinking. So Mark, are you there? And
here, Claire. Yes, can somebody allow me to share, please?
yeah, I'll just do that now. Hang on. There you go.
Fab. Right, here we go. Just close down a couple of windows. And there we are, full screen. Okay. Right, let's look at something a bit weird and wonderful this week. I'm now going to attempt to pronounce that word, Voorrangsplein, which we'll get to the detail in a second. But a few weeks ago, I was lucky enough to get to Utrecht. Had a little nose round, and this is something I've looked at a while ago. I've written about it, fascinated by the concept. It's motoring infrastructure, but it's with a bit of a difference, which we'll discover as we go through this short group of slides. So, yeah, what did I just say? Well, I actually said a priority square, which is the literal translation. It's a thing that's been kicking around in the Netherlands for quite some time. I'm not going to pronounce the next acronym, but it comes from the Lagus idea, which translated means if you drive slowly, you go faster. And this design is about slowing things down. People can drive more smoothly, which is better for actual traffic flow, safety, and air quality. But with a lot of things I talk about, it's motoring infrastructure. And you'll see the context of this particular scheme I looked at in just a second. However, before we get to that, let's flip the thing around for the UK so we can understand how things work here. So this is a type of junction that we can apply to either a crossroads or a T-junction. The side roads generally will be a lot quieter than the main road. Lots of interesting features here. So the main road has priority running through the junction. The reason I mention that is across the North Sea, you tend to have different rules at junctions than we do in the UK. So explicitly, this is a main road treatment. You'll notice there's some very wide deflection horizontally, which slows drivers down for the feature. And this is quite a good gateway feature as you come into a town from a high speed environment. The traffic lanes are very narrow. So in the Dutch guidance, those traffic lanes are between 2.9 and 3.5 meters. You'll notice the grey area in the middle. So we do have to accommodate larger vehicles. So we can use overrun areas in lots of parts of the junction design. So every junction has a slightly different context, but we want to keep drivers pinched down for most vehicles, but recognise that larger vehicles might have to get through there. The Dutch translation for rumble strip is rattle strip, which is quite interesting, probably from the rattle of ladders on backs of vans. You'll notice, again, this is flipped for the UK, so we've got right turning pockets for drivers. So we've got a pair of those here because it's a crossroads. And crucially, from a safety point of view, as a crossroads here, you can't drive between one and the other. You have to go around the system to make your turn. So that's quite an important safety feature. So a couple of movements. Let's run through the little hand here. So again, from the UK perspective, I wish to turn right from the main road. As you'll be familiar with, we can pull into the little right turn pocket, but it's not opposite the junction. You have to wait for a gap in the oncoming traffic to finish your manoeuvre. If you're coming from the side road and you want to turn right, again, this is UK context here, you cross over the stream of traffic to get to that gap, and then you finish your manoeuvre. And what this is doing is breaking down the movements for drivers into simple bite-sized chunks, so they don't have to cope with two flows of traffic, one from each direction, or people turning right in the right turn pockets, that kind of thing. Everybody's separated, it's taken nice and gently, nice and slowly, people can find the gaps. The whole thing works nice and smoothly. Key issues to think about. Generally speaking, this is about a distributor type road with an access road. So the main road is not long distance traffic, but through traffic going into the town centre maybe. Access roads, maybe low traffic neighbourhood type arrangements. It's not always the case. That could be another distributor road. For the main road, and this is both directions added, you can get around up to 25,000 vehicles per day on that main road. That's very, very high for a single carriageway road. Quite a lot of, say, from a London context, I know the numbers, two-way A road, maybe 18 to 20,000 vehicles a day. So that's a very high capacity junction. And crucially, this operates without traffic signals. It's not a roundabout, it's a different thing, but it copes with similar capacities in that urban context. And that translates to about 1,200 vehicles per hour in each direction. That's kind of your peak times. But it means the side roads aren't massively busy, so it's quite an offset relationship. Probably for that reason alone, if you're trying to get onto a roundabout and it's really, really busy from a side road that's very quiet, that's quite tricky. This design slows everything down, so you have more of a chance of getting out the side road as a driver. So I've said, yeah, breaks things down into chunks. It's self-explaining. As you drive along here or you come out the side road, you can see where you go. It's very obvious. You don't need to litter the place with lots and lots of signs. Less complex than signalised junctions, but we can use signals. So if the main road is getting bunged up a bit by the side roads being a bit busier, we can actually put signals in and hold those main roads just for a few seconds to allow that to clear, or we could put crossings in. There's other things we can do there. Still plenty of space taken up, but the footprint's not the same as a large signalised junction. There is a lot more space released as a retrofit for greening. I've mentioned the overruns. This is not specifically for high-speed roads. I think potentially 30 tends to be 30 miles an hour tends to be the design speed. I reckon you can go a bit faster for suburban or edge of urban areas, but there's a debate to be had there. So what about walking, wheeling and cycling? This is active travel cafe. So it's motor traffic management. Most things that we do out there are as a result. So we do have to add our walking and cycling and wheeling round the outside of the thing. The default position in Dutch guidance is the main roads are uncontrolled, so you have to cross when you can find a gap, but the roads are very, very narrow and you're crossing them one at a time. Again, this is slower, it's easier to cross, all that kind of thing, but you can put crossings on the main road, and there's plenty of examples where you've got signals, for example. So let's look at a couple of examples. This is Drymond, which is kind of eastish of Amsterdam, a junction I cycled through when it was being rebuilt. So this very much is, this is a Dutch national road, fairly high speed on the approaches, brought down to 50 kilometers an hour through the junction. It's a bit of a mishmash of lots of things going on here, but essentially you've got the Voorrangsplein arrangement in the middle, connecting to a village that goes off up to the north here, and a couple of little very, very small country lanes in here. So that's not even urban. I mean, that's rural edge design. But let's look at the Utrecht Ring Road, which is the one I visited and saw it live. So this is currently being subject to a big road diet. Dual carriageway at the moment, or it was dual carriageway with 2 lanes in each direction, so 2+2. That's now being reduced mainly to a 1+1, still a dual carriageway with a central reserve in the middle. Lots of technical reasons, which I won't go into, but crucially, it gives us more space for active travel and landscaping. So we heard earlier in the presentations, people talking about city boulevards. This is very much that. So we are massively reducing the traffic flow, so less traffic there, less pollution, less noise. It's still an important arterial route for the city, but we are trying to rebalance. When people say, what about the main roads? Well, here you go. Here's something we can do on the main roads. It's part of a much wider project in Utrecht. They've got a city circulation plan going on to stop people driving through the city, push that through traffic back to motorways and regional roads. You will drive into an area of the city and drive out the way you came if you have genuine business there. You might recognise the chap in the photo there. That's Twitter's very own Bicycle Dutch, Mark Wagenberg, who very kindly took me around Utrecht and the scheme in particular. What you can see here is a bit of the after, lots of greening going on here. The barrier here is meant to be temporary. It will come out in due course, but that was because the works were long term. Apparently they put that in because it was cheaper than having to set barriers up every 5 minutes. So there you go. This is part of the ring road, and this is a junction we're going to have a look at in a bit more detail now. It's an absolute horror show. Okay, it's got the cycle tracks, it's got the footways and things, but you've got lots of traffic signals within the left turning pockets here. You've got internal stop lines. That's what those are known as there. Really complicated. If you go into Google and look at this location, it's a big open asphalt traffic wasteland. And this is what it looks like today, or it was nearly 3 weeks ago. So you can just see that that left turn pocket because we're back in Netherlands. There's the other one on the other side with that black car coming around here. One side road here, one side road over there. So we've taken lots of capacity out of Utrecht because of the much wider plan. So this junction now flows. Here's another view looking further up. There's the uncontrolled walking and cycling crossings there, but it is over a very, very narrow road where traffic speeds genuinely are a lot lower. Loads of space for greening compared to where it was. So this really is now this city boulevard. And yet, because those that are going ahead are being prioritised, so the main road traffic gets priority, but so do people walking and cycling on that main route. That's the big desire line. So people might plug into this route for cycling, but they've got full priority. And as I stood there watching people use it, the drivers were coping. Again, these turns are very slow because of the way the curbs are set out. You can see the overrun strip there for larger vehicles if necessary. You can just in the distance there some traffic signals to hold the main road. So if the thing's getting bunged up a bit, hold the main road traffic, let it clear, then it gets released again. So a lot more low tech compared to what it was before. Lots of green space, calmer, smoother. Everybody really benefits who's from using that. And that's me. I'll stop sharing.
I love that last picture, Mark, just like, you know, what prioritising people over cars looks like. Kate, got a question?
Oh, yeah, hi, thanks, Mark. That was really interesting. I don't know if you can share and go back to the image of the cartoony standard image. I was wondering whether older drivers struggled with making what is essentially a U-turn. Yeah, so older drivers, for example, going from right to left and wanting to go right, they've got to make quite a sharp maneuver looking back over the shoulder, and van drivers have a panel on the van, which means visibility would be poorer. I was wondering whether that caused problems in practice.
I mean, I can only go. I've only seen a couple of sites running live, and I didn't see anybody have any problems. I mean, I think generally in terms of the geometry, things are very, very tight. So
Yeah.
For general drivers, the greys, you're not entering there. So if you're turning right, you're almost perpendicular to traffic coming from your left. So yeah, you've obviously got to be looking through. Again, from the UK context, you're looking through the side screen there to do that.
Yeah.
I think what you need to bear in mind here, if you compare this with a standard right turn pocket, obviously you're seeing the oncoming traffic.
Yeah.
If you had this set up as a traditional UK approach with two right turn pockets, I guess it'd have to be a staggered crossroads in that situation. For people coming up the side roads, you've got to cope with the main road traffic flow and anybody in that pocket. So yeah, there's probably lots of pros and cons in this, but I think at least from what I saw as a whole, everything is so much slower. So if somebody does make a mistake and pulls out, and if they do hit, then obviously the impact of that is going to be a lot lower.
It's low speed. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I think that's the emphasis.
Yeah,
sorry, go, Kate.
Yeah, the image you had on the next slide, actually, it's more straight across. Yeah, the actual. Yeah, sorry, go back one.
This
yeah,
one.
that the actual. At the point at which you're making that turn, you're actually facing the side road. You don't have to turn right into the opposing traffic and then left into the side road, UK wide.
Yeah.
You actually are straight across. So I think that layout works better. So I do worry, with an aging population, we increasingly tend to create tight layouts, which are good in terms of slowing traffic. But if older drivers who can't look back over their shoulder can't see, then you tend to have problems.
Yeah.
We've got a newly built right turn example. I'll chuck the link in the chat if anyone wants to see. Loads of people, it's near me, so people near me, older people near me say how on earth are we meant to judge traffic speed? Because I can't swivel my head like an owl, which is what you have to do to see at that junction. So I think it's that difficulty is realistically, everyone as they get older has worse neck mobility. And it is going to be more and more of a problem if we create arrangements that have people to look back over your shoulder, because actually lots of people.
Thanks for raising that. Sorry, thanks for raising that issue. I think it's a really good point. Sorry, I'm just conscious of time. Great to put the link in the chat. Thank you. We're going to finish with Tim. Final question. We've only got 1 minute, so make it quick.
Okay, just to say, got my new copy of Ruler this morning and read the Orla Shanui article, which is about a crossroads in Holland, where she lives, where they've taken all the traffic lights out. There are 3 tram lines. There are 4 main roads coming in. There are cars, vans, buses, bikes, scooters, and everybody negotiates through safely, all done with little hand signals, eye movement, and so on, because everybody's keeping people safe. I was amazed by it. It's a good article. If I can find a way to share it, I will.
We'll share a link to the Twitter account where you saw it shared. Thanks, Tim. So that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks for to our speakers, and just remains for me to look forward to next week, where we've got what I think will be really interesting. We've got urban planner Holly Weir, who's going to talk about how her experience of making child-friendly places in particular. She's done some research on that, and she'll be sharing it with us next week. So that's all from us, and look forward to seeing you next week. But as you know, our sessions are all recorded, so if you can't join us, that'll be on our website. Thanks again.